This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
I'm Arthur Grimes, and I'm here as one of the 2013 visiting professors on the NZ UK Link Fellowship. My background is three relevant roles. I've just stepped down as Chairman of the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, which I've been doing for the last 10 years, and before that I was an employee of the bank for some years before that. And I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Auckland in economics, and I work with a group in Wellington, New Zealand called Motu Economic and Public Policy Research, which is a charitable trust doing grant-funded economic research. So as part of the visiting professorship, the idea is to give 4 public lectures, and because I've just stepped down as the Chairman of the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, the 4 public lectures are all going to be on some aspects of central banking. The first lecture, which was held at the Bank of England, was on the topic of inflation targeting, and that was a subject that I'm intimately sort of involved in. I established the first inflation targeting regime in New Zealand, which was also the first one in the world, so that was back in 1990. So that's a topic that I've obviously followed very, very closely since then, both when I was on the staff of the Reserve Bank and then later on as chairman, and also in an academic situation. And it's a big topic at the moment after the global financial crisis, as to whether countries such as the UK or New Zealand or others should follow an inflation targeting regime or should switch to some other regime. The second public lecture is on exchange rate regimes, and in particular the benefits and the costs, if you like, of having a fixed exchange rate, such as being a country within the euro, or having a flexible exchange rate, such as New Zealand and the UK and many other countries outside of the euro have. And that's a finely balanced issue, and I looked at the pros and cons of adopting one regime or the other. The third lecture is on Macro-Prudential Policies, and that's being held at the London School of Economics. Macro-Prudential Policies are essentially policies that central banks are increasingly using to try and contain excesses in asset markets, such as the housing market or stock markets, etc. And obviously following on from the global financial crisis, where asset markets collapsed after the banking crisis. There is some experimentation at the moment as to whether central banks can introduce policies such as changing the capital ratios on banks or loan-to-value ratios for housing, etc., and whether those can affect the housing market or the stock market, etc. So we've experimented a little bit in New Zealand on those. Some other countries, such as Canada and some of the Asian countries, have experimented with them. So it's really an examination of whether they might work or might not work. And the fourth lecture, which will be held at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, is on a related subject. It's on micro-prudential policies. So in other words, the policies that we place on individual banks or individual financial institutions to make sure that they're sound, so that they don't take poor, risky decisions. And that's very much looking at the issue of responsibility of bankers themselves, but also responsibilities of people who invest in banks, including depositors. So it's looking at sort of not just the banks, but also the people who use banks as well. And that's part of a broader symposium that the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies is holding. Well, it's fantastic for me to come back to London. I did my PhD studies at the London School of Economics. And I've always had a very close relationship with the Bank of England and some of the academics at other colleges. And one of the nice things about the School of Advanced Studies is that I've been interacting with non-economists, which is actually really, really great. I tend to work with economists mainly, but also do some work with people outside of economics in my normal research background. And it's fantastic mixing with people who are working on the humanities or in law or whatever, and having a cross-fertilisation of ideas.